Here's another example of a yes/no question. Take a moment and solve this one. Okay, let's go ahead and solve this question. Is n an integer? So you can see this is a yes/no question. Now, before we evaluate the statements, we have to know the definition of an integer, and those are whole numbers that do not include decimals or fractions. And integers can be negative, 0, or positive. So let's evaluate statement 1. n over 3 is an integer. Well, this tells us that n itself must be an integer, because the only possible values you can plug in for n are multiples of 3, since any multiple of 3 divided by 3 will end up with an integer as a result. So statement 1 tells us that n must be a multiple of 3 and therefore an integer. And it's sufficient, and we're down to answer choices A or D. Now let's evaluate statement 2. 2n is an integer. Well, in this case, n itself could be an integer. If we pick 2 for n and multiply it by 2, we end up with 4, which is an integer. However, we could also pick a value such as 2.5, which multiplied by 2 ends up with an integer as a result. We could also pick a fraction for n such as 3/2, which multiplied by 2 would end up with an integer as a result. So the value we pick for n can either be an integer or it can be not an integer. And so statement 2 is going to be insufficient because we're ending up with a sometimes yes, sometimes no result. And the correct answer choice will be A. It was only statement 1 that told us definitively that n itself is an integer. Statement 2 told us that sometimes n is an integer, sometimes it's not.